Our next speaker is Dr. Glenn Aparicio Parry. I did not know about him until I read his really nice book called Original Thinking, A Radical Revisioning of Time, Humanity, and Nature. I'm holding this book in my hand right now, and copies are available. There are a few copies at the back. This book won, it's an award-winning book. It won a Nautilus silver medal, I think in the cosmology category.
Science and
cosmology category. And he also has a forthcoming book called Sacred Politics to be published in 2020.
God willing.
He's an educator, speaker, and his lifelong passion is to reform thinking into a coherent, cohesive whole. The founder and past president of the Seed Institute. He's currently the director of a grassroots think tank called the Circle for Original Thinking. And he lives in northern New Mexico, which is where he's visiting us from. So I'm very pleased to have you here. And let's all welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you, Em. Thank you. It's on already. Thank you. Just a momentito. I'm going to get a couple of sacred chairs out. They are. It's a little like that Clint Eastwood thing. Except I am going to put these chairs here for the ancestors. Just three. I got it. That's all right. I don't know. Yeah, we'll get more though. If you get, after, we'll have more. Thank you. Thank you. It is a real joy to be here. Thank you very much for that first talk. That was beautiful. I was a graduate student at the California Institute of Integral Studies, formerly the California Institute of Asian Studies, as I think you two gentlemen know, and maybe the audience. And the founder of the California Institute of Integral Studies was Haridas Chaudhuri. And we also think of Beena, his wife, Beena Chaudhuri, as the founder. They're both now in the spirit world, both very sacred ancestors. But it was a beautiful experience being at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. When I wrote the book, Original Thinking, somewhere in that book, I have no idea what page, I say, remember this if you do not remember anything else from this book. The origin of thinking is thanking. The origin of thinking is thanking. And in my own research, I found at least 7 languages: English, French, Dutch, German, Norse, Frisian, and Old Saxon, when in fact the very word thinking comes from thanking, comes from giving of gratitude. Why? I don't know why, but I have a good idea. I believe it is because originally all our thoughts were prayers. All our thoughts were a way of connecting to the rest of creation. And so I will begin with a prayer. I came here yesterday and determined this is East. I don't want to turn my back to you much, but I will just very briefly. Ah, beloved Creator. Ah, beloved Creator, thank you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this blessing. Thank you for the blessing of being alive and for all our days to come. Thank you for the ancestors that brought us to this moment in time. Thank you. Thank you, the ancestors of this land, the Anishinaabe peoples. Thank you to dear ancestor, that I knew, Tobasanakwe Canoe, former chief of the Northern Ojibways, one of the strongest men I have ever known. Thank you, Tobasanakwe. Tobasanakwe, who traveled to Rome and presented an eagle feather to the Pope. And years later, when his body was riddled with 4 types of cancer, traveled again to Rome because the first Native American saint was going to be canonized. And Tobasanakwe made it his last act that he went to Rome and saw that occur, and then he came home and prepared to die. Thank you, Tobasanakwe Canoe. Thank you for your strength. Thank you. You were separated from your brother, your twin brother at birth. And at 5 years old, sent out to be in a vision quest to reunite with your brother. Thank you, Tobasanakwe. Thank you for that. You then you were chosen for the medicine path. Thank you for that. Thank you for your life as a shining example. Thank you, Tobasanakwe Canoe. Thank you, Grandfather Leon Secretero, Grandfather Leon Secretero, Grandfather Leon Secretero. Thank you, Grandfather. Thank you for the beautiful wisdom you have shared. Thank you for your patience. Grandfather Leon's own children said that he never got mad at them, never once. Thank you. Thank you for understanding that whatever is moving in energy passes. Thank you for understanding the timing. Thank you, Grandfather Leon. Thank you, Grandfather Dan Moonhawk Alford. Dan Moonhawk Alford, consciousness linguist. The one that described himself as standing at the lonely intersection of quantum physics, language, Native America, and consciousness. Thank you, Moonhawk. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen, Paula Gunn Allen, Paula Gunn Allen from Laguna, also Scotch, Irish, and Lebanese. Thank you. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen, for your sense of humor. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen, for bringing back the sacred feminine. Thank you for bringing it back in the consciousness that we needed it so badly. And thank you because your dream is now becoming true. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen. Thank you. Thank you for all the ancestors of each and every one of you. Thank you for the ancestors. Thank you for the ancestors of the grasses, the trees, the flowers, the bees. Thank you for the ancestors of the lakes. Thank you for being here in lake country, wild rice country. Thank you for the ancestors of the wild rice. Thank you for the ancestors of Mother Earth. Thank you for everything that has grown here that comes back again. Thank you for that. Thank you for that cycle of life. Thank you for that sacred hoop. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Creator. Thank you for all the elements that make us alive as a human being. Thank you for the light of consciousness that penetrates all things. Thank you for the starlight. Thank you for the sunlight. Thank you for the light in my solar plexus. Thank you for the light of the central fire which we gathered around from ancient times and told stories. Thank you for that. Thank you for the air, the breathing, aware air, the prana, the pneuma, the ruach, the aware, living air. Thank you for that air. And thank you for that water everywhere. The water in outer space, the water in the sky held in clouds, the water under the earth, the water in the rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans, and most of all, the water in our heart that connects us to the heartbeat of nature. Thank you. Thank you for that water. Thank you for that water, that living ventricles that come through. Our ventricles and are just like Mother Earth has those rivers and lakes and streams. They're all connecting to Mother Earth's heart. Thank you for understanding that. Thank you for allowing us to beat together. Thank you for that. And thank you. Thank you, Pachamama, Mother Earth, that we're born from and that we return to. Thank you, Mother Earth. Thank you so much. Thank you for the blessing, being able to stand upon you, to live upon you, to be born from you, to return to you. Thank you for all the critters on Mother Earth. Thank you for the earthworm named after you. Thank you for the earthworm that has no eyes, but it can see, has no ears, but it can hear the vibrations. Thank you, the earthworm. Thank you, the bacteria. Things germinate because of germs. Thank you for the germs. Thank you for that. Thank you for the bacteria. Thank you for the mushrooms that interconnect in consciousness. We can learn a lot from mushrooms. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything growing in the earth. Thank you for that. Thank you for the soaring birds of prey. Thank you for the eagles and hawks that give us vision. And thank you for the little birds, the finches and jays that sing to us in the morning, the hummingbirds that come with message from another dimension. Thank you for that. Thank you, hummingbird, who's come many times when people pass. Thank you for owls that come when people pass sometimes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the four-leggeds. Thank you for the bear. This is the bear season, when the bear goes within. Thank you for the lessons we learn from you, bear, that we go within, find ourselves in this cold. Thank you for the cold. Thank you for the cold. Thank you for the bear, the fox, the bobcat, all the critters. Thank you for them. Thank you for the doggies and cats that keep us warm in the morning. Thank you for the doggies and cats. Thank you for that. Thank you. It is a great blessing to be here. It's a great blessing to be alive. Thank you so much. Thank you. I mentioned that thinking comes from thanking, but thinking also comes from places. Thinking comes from places. Thinking arises right out of the earth through our feet, through our souls, comes into us where we receive it. There's a reason why we say a thought came to me. It's a pretty strong saying in the language. A thought came to me. But thinking also arises, as the Buddha understood, arises with the patterns of nature. It arises with the patterns of nature. I love to think of thought as water because the language is riddled. You said one of them, the stream of consciousness. The language is riddled with the metaphors about thought and water, and there's a reason, I believe, because we're 70% water. When we chant, and thank you for the beautiful chant, I love to chant too. So. When we chant, if we chant, Aum Nirayambagam Jamage, we're singing to our own water. That's pretty wonderful. We're very connected with water. And thought is a lot like water because a little drop comes down, but that drop pools. It pools, and that pool leads to a stream of consciousness. And the stronger streams of consciousness become the main streams, and they head all the way out to the ocean. But a lot of thought isn't like that. Some thoughts dry up. They become like a dry riverbed. And maybe occasionally they'll come alive when it rains again. But some other thoughts are perhaps too important to go to the ocean right now. Their time is not now. So they go underground. They go underground like the underground rivers. And I've been blessed to know some wonderful Hopi people that live nearby. They're not in New Mexico. Technically, they're in Arizona, but I don't really make a division between those two states. And the Hopi people taught me a lot about how all the waters are interconnected. All the waters are in relationship. And the Hopi tried to explain this to the Peabody Coal Company that came and was making coal slurry, but it did not work. You know, the Peabody Coal Company was working with a different paradigm, and they said, we have this, we're just going to take this little bit, like a tablespoon of your groundwater. That's it, that's all we need for the coal slurry. Really, they need millions of gallons of water to create this. But the Hopi were worried because they knew that the groundwater was connected to the underground waters. And where they live on a mesa in Arizona, they lived for centuries without really water except for the spring water that came up, and they knew where that was. And they were concerned that taking the water away from the groundwater would interrupt this relationship, which it did. But thanks to the great efforts of Black Mesa Trust Company, my friend Vernon Masayesfa, and everyone that worked with him, the Peabody Coal Company is no more in Hopi land. They're gone. And the waters are coming back into balance. And that is so important. So important. You know, that's the way water, so water works like that. Water, remember those waters that are strong enough to create the mainstreams and they go to the ocean? That oceanic consciousness is like our collective unconscious. That oceanic consciousness is the consciousness that we don't think about very much because we all take for granted. You might call it what David Bohm called it, is our tacit infrastructure, our tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge, you could be like riding a bicycle. You don't have to think about riding a bicycle, you just do it. But you had to think about it once, but now you don't anymore. But that's the same thing. There's a lot of things we take for granted, a lot of assumptions, beliefs that are sitting there, and they're like in the ocean. But even there, eventually, those tacit ideas dry up, they evaporate, and they go back up into the sky. And imagine them hobnobbing with other idea clouds. They have a conference of clouds. And then when the time is right, they come down back onto Earth in a brainstorm. And that brainstorm is similar to what happens when we have a shift, a paradigm shift. You know, and it only happens once in a while, but it shakes things up. But it doesn't really, it's not fundamentally new. It's not new. It's just a big reorganization of what's already there. The water is a very important ancestor because it's been here for forever. The air is the same way. We're breathing the same air of the ancestors. So it's all connected. It's all connected. And I think my talk, I said we're going to talk about history. I want to say this about history and progress. And I don't like the word progress normally, but all our progress is an unfolding. It's an unfolding like the vegetable plant. Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, you were studying pragmatism. This is, you first have an instinct, then an opinion, then a knowledge. As the plant has root, bud, and fruit, trust your instinct to the end, though you can render no reason. It is vain to hurry it. It is vain to hurry it. But by trusting it to the end, it shall ripen into truth, and you shall know why you believe. Emerson understood very well the relationship between the rational mind and our instincts. Human beings, modern science likes to deny our instincts. Why? Our instincts are what connect us to everything. That's good. That's good. It's good to be connected. It's very good. But we don't want to live solely by our instincts, but we want to allow our instincts, give the patience for our instincts to unfold. And then it can unfold into heart-knowing, rational mind-knowing, and perhaps something beyond, but as you were alluding to. Yes, in the West, we used to understand. Emerson, by the way, is somebody that, particularly through his good friend Thoreau, was very influenced by Native Americans. He was very influenced by Native Americans, and that's where he got his place-based knowledge. But he was also very influenced by Vedic thought. He was quite the scholar, and he very much was interested in Vedic thought. And you can see the similarity. It reminds me of Sri Aurobindo almost, you know, from the physical to the emotional, vital to the mental. So all these things are interconnected. The unfolding of consciousness includes what came before. It does not make what came before obsolete. So Emerson is still one of my dear kind of friends. Emerson himself said that your books are like friends. You know, don't go to them too much, but occasionally. So in the West, time is something I want to talk about. To talk about history, we have to talk about time. Because time in the West used to be the same as it was in all places. Everybody understood that time was a circle, that time unfolded as a circle, like the seasons. Everybody understood that, and everybody understood it because it was super important to pay attention to the migration pattern of the animals, to pay attention to when the berries, seeds, and nuts could be harvested, the fruit. You had to pay attention. You know, and everybody understood that time was a circle. Plato and Aristotle understood that time unfolded in the energy of a circle. So what happened? What happened with this concept we have of linear time? How did that come in? How did that come in the West? Well, it's somewhat hard to say. I think it kind of surreptitiously snuck up on us. Perhaps with the advent of Christianity, but not at first, because, you know, in the beginning of Christianity, they believed in reincarnation. You know, it's only 600 years into Christianity that reincarnation actually kind of got like pushed to the side, and we said no, and then began to focus on an afterlife. And perhaps that focus on an afterlife made us look toward the future, perhaps. But we can actually know with pretty assuredness exactly when the reification of the shift happened. In other words, when it became real was like 604 years ago with the invention of linear perspective in art. And here's the story. I mean, a guy named Brunelleschi, you know, pokes a hole in a canvas. He puts a mirror behind it. And he did that because he wanted to paint the world the way he thought God saw the world. He had the best of intent. And probably nothing much would have happened if Brunelleschi had just done what he did. But 25 years later, a cat comes along named Alberti. And Alberti saw what Brunelleschi was doing. And he liked it. And he decided to write a how-to book for artists of how to do linear perspective. And he called it A Treatise on Painting. And that book goes viral, as much as anything goes viral back then. It got translated into 5 or 6 European languages, and it spread like wildfire through Europe. And all of a sudden, the rage was to paint with linear perspective. And that wouldn't matter. That's fine. You know, linear perspective can be very useful. I know some Native American artists who paint paintings with both linear perspective, part of the painting, and another part of the painting doesn't have linear perspective at all. There's a famous painting called The Storyteller that's just like that. A New Mexico artist did it. But linear perspective has lots of consequences, a lot of consequences, a lot. And the biggest consequence is that it caught on so much that it started to be considered realism. And when it's considered realism, then what happens is that very soon after, we begin to confuse, as Korzybski said, the map with the territory. We begin to believe that what we're seeing on this depiction of reality is reality itself. You know, and this can be a major problem because really linear perspective is not real. It's one way of seeing, perhaps, but it's not real. Think about it. When you see linear perspective, if you know how to do linear perspective, it's like you're drawing lines that go from one single stationary eye out onto the landscape, just like a railroad track or something like that. And it goes to the vanishing point. But we have two eyes, two moving, very watery eyes. We have two very watery, moving eyes. They're made of at least 90% water. You know, we're kind of immersed in the world, and I use that word again, immersed. You know, so it's like there's so many things that are water, because we're water beings. That's what connects us. You know, and linear perspective had a lot of other ramifications that were some perhaps good, some not so good. It changed the way we viewed time. That's the major thing I want to focus on. It changed the way we viewed time. So in linear perspective, we think of objects closest to us as the near future. That's the words we use, the near future. Objects that further from us, we call the distant future, the distant future. And what's in between those objects, we don't pay much attention to anymore. That's not the way we used to think. It shifted all in Da Vinci's lifetime. When Da Vinci was a young boy, he understood that the natures emanated energy back to what he considered his eye as passive. But by the end of his life, as you've seen in the drawings that Da Vinci left us, he had shifted with the others, and he began to embrace linear perspective for the precision that it afforded, and he changed that view. But there's something lost and something gained in living every day, as Joni Mitchell said. It's true, because there's something lost and something gained in this new perspective. And it really is a literal new world view. It's the world view that's caused the West to have this subject-object division. This subject-object division that we're so beautifully addressing in our first talk, thank you. You know, how we can mend this, how we can come back into wholeness, how we come back into oneness. By the way, oneness, you have to be very careful with oneness. I'll just slip something in from the new book I'm writing, if you'll forgive me, which is a book on sacred politics. So one of the things about oneness, you know, oneness is beautiful when it's about oneness through unity and diversity. That's the most evolved form of oneness. But it's also oneness, by the way, to have a totalitarian or fascist regime. That's oneness too. That's oneness of sameness, oneness of everybody being undifferentiated. That's not so, it's not something I think we should aspire to. Anyway, so you have to be careful with oneness a little bit. But in any case, the concept of time in history is really important because it pains me to think of when I learned history in school, all it was dates on a timeline. You know, it was 1776, the Declaration of Independence, And then 1789, the Constitution, 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, 1812, the War of 1812, and then there's the Civil War, 1860, and maybe nothing was important in between there or something. This silly idea that history is based on lines is just nuts, because it isn't. History, like everything else, unfolds. It unfolds. It unfolds in patterns. It unfolds and arises the way people think, and it tends to repeat itself too. It tends to repeat itself. And linear perspective has a lot of ramifications and consequences that can be bad. One of which is, it really was, this is what I need to do. My dear friend from the California Institute of Integral Studies, Praveen Agarwal, who was a student there. He was from India, but he came to San Francisco, I guess, in part to learn about his own culture. And we were taking a class from Dr. Reddy, a Vedanta scholar. And Praveen asked me one day, he said, "Glenn, what is it about the West that caused it to want to go forth and colonize?" And that was a great dialogue question, because I sat with it for about 20 years. And it's been almost 40 years since he asked that question. But I would say it's this. See, when we were back in antiquity and the way indigenous peoples think today, not because they're not changing, but because they're changing with the rhythms of the earth. They're very much changing, and very much, their philosophies are very alive and moving. But let's say this black square, let's say that black square there, if you can see it, is the origin point. It's the origin point, and there's a circle around this. And where we live in our territory, we become aware of the iterative cycles of that land. That's how we live. Our origin is our place. But what happened with linear perspective is that time replaced place. And I'll show you how. So now, when we're talking about science and cosmology, we talk about, if the Western cosmologist like Brian Swim, who I adore, is asked, when is the origin of the universe? They tend to answer in time, 13.8 billion years ago. But there's little attention given to where that was. But if you ask a Hopi about the origin of the universe, they're going to take you to the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Big Colorado River. They're going to take you to a place right there where they say that they emerged out of the ground, their sipapu, to come into this world. So origin was place. The very word original originally meant place. So here, if this is our origin, and we have embraced the concept of linear perspective, we move away from the origin, what Jean Gebser says, distance from the origin. We move away from it, and what do we call it? We call it progress. We call it progress. We call it progress. But you could just call it distance from the origin. You could call it distance from the origin, but we call it progress. And we've built an entire worldview in the West, anyway, that is based on the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulating a body of knowledge. But that can be a very tricky thing. And it particularly has a ramification with education. To Leroy Littlebear, a mentor of mine, education is renewal. Education is renewal. That's what Leroy says. I couldn't agree more. Education is renewal. Just like ceremonies are renewal. Education is renewal. Education ought not to be simply an accumulation of knowledge, because if you accumulate knowledge and you take it from one place to another, this is the very meaning of abstraction. To abstract from a place, local knowledge. There's local knowledge in a place. Let's abstract it and let's move it someplace else. You see, and that now that knowledge is more important than the local knowledge. We can take it someplace else because we're so confident that that knowledge is superior. We take it to the other place. In New Mexico, or probably in Michigan, if a child is asked on a quiz, what is a subway? And they answer a sandwich, they're marked wrong. Why is that? I mean, there's lots of Subway sandwich shops in New Mexico and Michigan, right? But there's no underground trains, right? I believe there's no underground trains. But somebody in Paris or London or Tokyo or wherever there are subways decided that that was the main meaning of a subway. So here's the problem. Abstract knowledge is really the seed of colonization. It's the seed of colonization because it brings with it the idea that there's some kind of knowledge that we have, or that the Europeans in Europe had, that they thought was superior, and they're going to take it someplace. They're going to take it someplace, and they're going to try to subsume the local indigenous knowledge. By the way, that didn't quite happen. I'm not going to go into it today, but that's what they wanted to happen. It happened in some ways, but in other ways, Native America greatly influenced the founding of the United States of America. And it's Native American beliefs of liberty, justice, egalitarianism that were received by a few open-minded founding fathers like Ben Franklin, and that infused its way into the founding of this nation. So this nation has always been a hybrid of Native America and Western Enlightenment thought. And then it became a whole lot more. Then it became a place of maximum diversity. And that's a good thing, as long as we can have unity in diversity. But for some, it gets confusing, so they want to tamper it down. They don't want this much diversity. So that's another thing we have to be aware of, always aware of. Now, the consequence of this linear thinking in education is that education becomes fragmented. Education becomes fragmented. 200 years ago, there were only 4 subjects in education. There was physics, biology, mathematics, and theology. That was it. We got along just fine, just like we used to get along fine before cell phones. But for some reason, largely because, I would say, it's the carryover from linear perspective and the idea of fragmenting everything in our view, in our worldview, and studying it separately, we began to study subjects separately. And each time we would abstract a subject, there would be a little hole in the wholeness. So like at the end of the 19th century, we invented psychology as an academic discipline. Do you know, it was only 2 years later we invented sociology. You know why? Because we just took the psyche and abstracted it away from society, which is a pretty absurd concept to, I lived in Japan for 3.5 years. My wife is Japanese. That is an absolutely absurd concept to the Japanese. The idea of a psyche existing separately, not connecting, not being in relationship with other human beings would be considered nonsensical, totally ridiculous. And I agree with the Japanese, actually. Our thoughts are shared in a field of consciousness. Our thoughts are shared in a field. So as soon as we had psychology and we were separating the psyche from society, we had to create sociology. Most recently, we've created my probably favorite subject, which really my book, Original Thinking, ought to be categorized as, is eco-psychology. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that term, but eco-psychology is now taught in about 7 places. At Naropa, it's taught at California Institute of Integral Studies, it's taught at Lesley College, it's taught about 7 places. And very simply, eco-psychology is connecting the psyche back up with its true origin, which is nature. So that's what I feel. That's what I feel. These abstractions they create a problem. They create a problem because, just like Whitehead said, it becomes the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. The more we have these abstractions, we begin to believe that that partial reality is the whole because we go so into it. Now, there's an advantage of abstraction. I don't want to say that it doesn't have advantages. When you abstract, when you study a particular subject really carefully, you can develop an increased knowledge about that subject. But we also need to reconnect it with the whole. And if we get lost in our individual subject, which tends to happen in universities where they have completely different languages, we call it jargon, but it might as well be a different language because they're speaking in a way that only other people in their language can speak. And so then what happens, one of the most well-meaning things is people say, let's do interdisciplinary education. But that only works so far. So it's a little like going to a Chinese restaurant, taking one from column A, one from column B, and you think that you can create a beautiful dish on your plate, but actually what happens is we create even more specialization because then people become a specialist in AB. They create a new field and greater fragmentation occurs. It really does. But around the 1970s, we have an awareness start to creep in America that we need to move toward more holistic, integral education. California Institute of Integral Studies starting then. A lot of holistic education starts then. A lot of the Native American studies programs, which are always holistic, start then, but unfortunately they're in one aspect of the school. It would be great if they were the whole school. But they're still, they started then in the 1970s because it's a movement of consciousness to become more holistic. And it's a very good thing. It's a very good thing because we've become so enamored with the abstract. I'll put this in terms of a story. It's better to tell a story. Okay, and then I'm going to close and ask you a question. That's the way I do things. It's a little different. Instead of you asking me a question, I'm going to ask you a question. But there's a story about a king, a European king who wanted to have a map of his kingdom. And so he commissions a map of the entire kingdom, and he gets the finest cartographers in all the land together, all the men and women cartographers, and he tells them to meet for as long as you like and to bring me the best map you can use. Spare no expense, use the finest pigments, we will cover it. And so they work. They work for months and months. And they come back to the palace. And the king is pleased. He says, come on in. And they come into the room where the throne is, and they lay out the map. And it's quite large. It's like 6 feet by 6 feet by 6 feet. And the king looks at it. And he's very pleased. Until he says, where are my mountains? I look out to the north, I see these mountains. Where are my mountains? And they say, what are you talking about, Your Highness? We have the major mountains, we have the Pyrenees, we have the Alps. What mountains are you talking? And he points out the window, he says, those mountains over there. They say, Your Highness, those are just hills. You want us to put them on the map? He goes, yes, those are my mountains. I want them on the map. And so this is going to take a lot of work. So they go back and they go back and they work and they work and they work and they take almost a year, and they come back and they say, we have the map. And the king says, bring it in. And so they do. But this is humongous map. This is 25 feet by 25 feet. It's going way out to here and here. And they can barely fit it in the room where the throne is. But they prop it up as best as they could. And they say, look, Your Highness, we have the mountains now. We call them the Golden Mountains. We named them after you. And so the king looks at the map and he's pleased for a time. He looks at the map. And then he says, but where's my river? Where's my river? And the river that's at the base of the mountain there. And they say, Your Highness, what river? And he points out again, he says, the river over there, I go there. I use it to get water from it. I bless it with water. I bless it on my face and eyes. It blesses me every day. It's the river. It's my river. It has to be on the map. But they argue back a little bit. They say, Your Highness, that river runs dry part of the year. It's not even really a full stream. We can't put that on the map. But he's the king, so he gets his way, and they say, okay. And they go back, and then they take 2-3 years, and they come back, and the king says, bring in the map. And I say, well, we can't. It's too big. And so they bring the map. It's out into the palace grounds. The map is as big as the palace itself. And you can walk on this map. So the king walks on the map to look at the things on the map. And there are his mountains. There are his river. But the king says, where is the house I was born? Where is that on the map? And they said, Your Highness, you are of humble origins. We can't possibly put the house you were born on the map. He says, no, the house where I was born is central to my existence. It must be on the map. And so this time they work for 6 years. 6 years, and they're working, and finally, they come back and they have created a map that has every river, every mountain, every tree, every dry stream bed, every house, everything is on the map. But unfortunately, the map is the size of the kingdom itself. And so to actually lay out the map, they have to clear the kingdom of everything. And so that's what they do. They clear the kingdom of the palace, the grounds, the trees, the water, everything. And then they put out the map, and they live on the map very happily until the rainy season comes. And the water comes down, and the water starts to crimp the map, and the map starts to dissolve and turn up in little places, and a little time goes by, and little shoots and buds are coming out through the map. There's little trees being born right through the map, and dirt and stuff is getting on the map, and people are saying, what's this stuff? What's this stuff? And really, this story was told by David Abram in a dialogue circle, and what David said, which I agree with, is this is where we are at now. You know, we've gone on this pathway where we have privileged abstract